In this episode, we're going to focus on a challenge that catches many privacy programs off guard. Even if you build a strong program today, it can quietly become outdated tomorrow if you do not track what is changing around it. Regulatory change includes new laws, updated regulations, enforcement trends, and guidance that shifts how obligations are interpreted. Emerging threats include new ways personal information can be misused, exposed, or exploited, including threats that come from technology changes and from attacker behavior. Privacy-enhancing technologies, PETs, are techniques and methods designed to reduce privacy risk while still enabling useful data processing, such as reducing identifiability, limiting exposure, and controlling what is revealed. For brand new learners, the key idea is that privacy is a moving target, not because privacy principles change, but because the environment changes. New products, new data uses, and new societal expectations can make yesterday's controls insufficient. Task 13 is about building a repeatable habit of staying current, so the program does not drift into a state where it looks mature but cannot respond effectively to new requirements and new risks. Start by understanding why change tracking is part of privacy governance, not an optional extra task for when someone has time. Privacy programs are judged not only by what they intended to do, but by whether they can adapt when obligations evolve. Laws can expand, add new rights, change notification timelines, or clarify how consent and transparency must work. Regulators can shift priorities, focusing enforcement on certain harms, industries, or data types, which changes the risk landscape even if the written law is the same. Court cases and formal guidance can also change interpretations, which can turn a previously acceptable practice into a risky one. Meanwhile, technology evolves quickly, creating new ways to infer sensitive information from ordinary signals, new ways to track people across contexts, and new ways to automate decisions about individuals. If a program ignores these changes, it can become brittle, meaning it breaks under new pressure and requires emergency fixes. A program that tracks change continuously can make smaller, safer adjustments over time and avoid large reactive overhauls. Tracking regulatory change begins with understanding that organizations rarely have one single privacy rulebook, because obligations depend on where the organization operates and whose data it processes. Even if you do not memorize laws, you can still understand the types of changes that matter. Changes can create new obligations, like requiring new disclosures or new user choices. They can change what counts as sensitive information, expanding the scope of data that needs stronger safeguards. They can introduce new accountability requirements, such as documentation, assessments, or reporting to authorities. They can also increase penalties or adjust enforcement tools, which changes the organizational incentive to prioritize fixes. A change tracking practice therefore aims to detect what changed, determine whether it applies, and translate it into specific program updates. For beginners, the key is seeing this as a pipeline: detect, analyze, decide, implement, and verify, rather than as a vague awareness activity. Enforcement trends are particularly important because they show what regulators care about in practice, which helps privacy programs prioritize. A law can be broad and complex, and enforcement often highlights specific failures, such as deceptive notices, dark patterns that manipulate choices, excessive retention, weak security, or failure to honor rights requests. If regulators begin focusing on a certain type of harm, like misuse of location data or unfair automated decisions, a privacy program should treat that as a signal to review related practices proactively. Enforcement trends can also reveal how regulators interpret ambiguous terms, which can inform how policies and procedures should be written. For a beginner, it helps to understand that enforcement is like a spotlight. It does not illuminate every part of the law equally at all times, but it shows where consequences are most likely. Tracking these signals helps avoid being surprised by an audit or investigation that focuses on an area the organization assumed was low risk. A current program learns from other organizations' mistakes and adjusts before it becomes the next example. Emerging threats are the second half of staying current, and threats evolve in ways that impact privacy even when no new law appears. External attackers change tactics, such as targeting identity systems, exploiting misconfigurations, and abusing trusted relationships with vendors. Internal threats evolve too, such as employees misusing access or data being repurposed quietly for new analytics goals. New business models can introduce threats, like extensive tracking across apps or the monetization of behavioral data in ways people do not expect. New technologies can create new inference risks, where sensitive traits can be guessed from ordinary activity patterns, and new re-identification risks, where datasets thought to be non-identifying can be linked and traced back to individuals. A privacy program that tracks emerging threats looks beyond breach headlines and asks what new harm pathways are becoming easier. It also watches for changes in where data is stored and shared, because the more distributed the data environment becomes, the more complex oversight must be. Staying current means continuously refreshing your threat model, so controls match reality rather than an outdated picture. A crucial beginner insight is that privacy threats often become more serious as data accumulates, because time amplifies risk. When data is kept for longer periods, patterns become clearer and inferences become easier, even if each single record seems harmless. When multiple datasets are combined over time, linkage becomes more powerful, and a stable identifier can enable deep profiling. Emerging threats, therefore, include not only new attack methods, but also new uses of old data, such as using historical data to build prediction models about individuals. This is why retention and minimization are privacy defenses as much as they are compliance topics. A program that stays current treats data volume and retention as variables in risk, not as neutral facts of storage. It also recognizes that new features can change privacy risk by increasing precision, expanding sharing, or changing default settings that affect user choice. Tracking emerging threats means staying alert to these amplification effects. Now bring in privacy-enhancing technologies, because staying current is not only about responding to new risks, but also about adopting better ways to reduce risk while still enabling useful work. PETS are methods that aim to reduce identifiability, limit exposure, and protect sensitive data in use, not just in storage. For beginners, you can think of PETS as tools in a toolbox that help you achieve privacy principles like minimization and purpose limitation in technical form. Some PET approaches reduce the amount of personal information processed by transforming it into less identifying forms, such as through aggregation or controlled anonymization techniques. Some approaches limit what can be learned from data, for example, by adding noise in a way that preserves overall patterns while protecting individuals. Some approaches allow computation without revealing raw data broadly, which can reduce exposure to insiders and vendors. The key point is not to become implementation heavy, but to understand that PETS offer design options that can change the trade-offs between privacy and utility. Evaluating PET relevance requires tying the technology to the problem you are trying to solve, because using a fancy method in the wrong place can create false confidence. If the biggest risk is excessive collection, the best improvement may be collecting less, not transforming the data afterward. If the biggest risk is internal misuse, stronger access control and auditing might be more effective than data transformation. If the biggest risk is sharing with third parties, PETS that reduce exposure during sharing can be valuable, especially when combined with contract limits and monitoring. If the biggest risk is inference from detailed behavior, approaches that reduce precision or add uncertainty can help, but they must be designed carefully to avoid breaking legitimate needs. A mature program does not chase every new privacy technology trend. It evaluates options based on clear risks, clear requirements, and clear evidence of effectiveness. For beginners, it is enough to see PETS as potential enablers that can make privacy by design outcomes easier to achieve when used thoughtfully. Keeping the program current also requires an operating rhythm, meaning a repeatable cadence of review and update rather than sporadic reactions. This rhythm includes regular scanning for regulatory changes and guidance, periodic refresh of threat assumptions based on new incidents and industry patterns, and periodic review of whether existing controls still match the organization's data flows. It also includes change triggers, such as launching a new product, expanding to a new region, adding a new vendor, or introducing a new form of automated decision-making. When a trigger occurs, the program should know how to reassess quickly and what questions to ask. A privacy program that stays current also updates its internal materials, such as procedures and training, so employees follow the latest expectations rather than outdated routines. This is where governance becomes real. It is the system that ensures updates are translated into action. Without that translation, the program may know what changed but still fail to adapt. Finally, staying current depends on communication and collaboration, because privacy intelligence is useless if it stays inside one team's head. The program needs a way to communicate changes to stakeholders in language they can act on, such as what must change in a procedure, what must change in a product requirement, or what must change in a vendor relationship. It also needs a way to prioritize, because not every change requires immediate overhaul and resources are limited. Prioritization should consider the severity of potential harm, the likelihood of enforcement, the sensitivity of the data involved, and the feasibility of changes. A mature program also documents decisions about how it responded to change, including what it chose not to do and why, because that documentation supports accountability later. For beginners, the key is to see change tracking as a bridge between the outside world and internal operations. The program stays current only when the organization can absorb new information and adjust behavior predictably. As we close, remember that Task 13 is about preventing privacy program drift by building a disciplined habit of tracking what changes in regulations, threats, and available protective methods. Regulatory change includes new laws, updated guidance, and shifting enforcement patterns that can alter what is expected and what is risky. Emerging threats include new misuse pathways, new inference and linkage risks, and new ways incidents occur across complex systems and vendors. PETS offer evolving options to reduce exposure and identifiability while still enabling useful data processing, but they must be evaluated based on specific risks and needs. A program stays current by maintaining a repeatable rhythm of scanning, analyzing applicability, translating changes into program updates, and verifying that updates are implemented. When you learn this discipline, you help the organization avoid being surprised by new expectations and new harms, and you make privacy by design a living practice rather than a frozen snapshot. That is how a privacy program earns durability in a world that keeps changing.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.